I know most of you here, but for those of you that don't know me, I'm Ursula Ruedenberg with the Pacifica Network Manager, and Stephanie's here. She's
Nice to meet you, everybody.
the usual host of these roundtables, but she's a little under the weather today, so she's joining, but not leading. And we're very, very pleased to have all of you here today. And if you are a presenter, thank you for being here. And if you are here interested in finding out more about running newsrooms, then this is a great place because various people from the network will share how they organize news and how they build a team without having a big budget. And so we're very pleased to have this.
Do you want to record this?
It is being recorded.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And we have a variety of people here who are talking about what they do. And the presenters will be Robert Hennelly. He's the station manager at WBAI Pacifica in New York. And Chali Pittman, who is the news director at WORT in Madison, Wisconsin. And Kathleen Murray from WSLR in Sarasota, Florida. And Lisa, would you introduce Althea and Don?
Yes, I want to start with Don Merrill, who's someone that I've known for many years, and he's played many roles, I'd say, in the KBOO newsroom. But he published a book a few years ago called Pledge, the Public Radio Membership Drive or Fund Drive. He knows not just the investigative reporting of the newsroom and the volunteer aspects of the newsroom, but he understands how it connects with the overall financial health of the station. And that's important because if you go to journalism school, they're going to tell you that you can never connect your newsroom to the fundraising machine, right? And that's true in a commercial newsroom. But our grassroots, non-commercial radio stations rely on the work of everyone in the building to help with that membership drive. So I'm really excited to hear from Don about how that works, because I think that, Don, your book is unique. Your approach is always unique. And Althea Billings just celebrated 5 years as the KBOO Evening News Director. We had a surprise party. It was so cool. And I could say a lot more about Althea, but her genius actually was during the pandemic, creating a system where reporters could contribute to the newscast remotely. And news directors had been trying to do that for more than a decade. So she's got the news chops, she's got the technical, and she's an innovator, right? And I think that's the most important things to know about my two friends and compatriots.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And this recording is, we're very excited about doing this meeting. Thank you, all of you who are willing to present, because I think this is going to be a great resource for a long, long time for many people. All of these sessions are recorded and they're posted on our website. And a lot of people, we constantly get feedback that people really use those recordings as a resource for learning how to do things better at their stations. So this is a topic, including what you just brought.
I was there with him.
All right. Just, including this issue of money and news, which is, I think something that almost all of us struggle with. And so we're really excited to hear these presentations. So let's get started. I think each presentation will be around 10 minutes. That's kind of what we're figuring on. And then we hope to have we hope that when you present, you'll stick around so that
unknown caller.
So then that people can ask questions. And I will let each of you presenters say at the beginning of your presentation whether you would like to take questions during your presentation or whether you would prefer people waited until the end. It's kind of up to you. So let's get started. Let's get started with
unknown caller.
With Bob Hennelly.
Yes.
And
it was in the middle of a pledge drive. So
yeah.
It's very funny that you talk about the intersection of resources and public information and this point of 2024 on the verge of the most significant election since 1864, which I was not around for. Of course, that was the Civil War election. And that was when the Civil War was still raging. And so I guess for me, I'm going to try to spend this time surveying the land a bit, because we have been very fortunate to create some new programming And so that is related to We Decide, America at the Crossroads 2024. And so we're in an environment right now where it's one of the things that our biggest challenge is Americans to a large degree have lost the ability to authenticate information. And what I mean by that is the fundamental question we always have to ask ourselves: how do we know what we know? And I'm sad to say that this degraded news environment is accelerating to a large degree, primarily because the way that Americans are getting information is over this little object here. And this little object here is going to tell you everything you need to know about your day, allegedly. And that information that you're getting about what you need to know is based on a series of analytics and programming decisions that are made based on your prior purchases, on the things that you've decided that you'd like to do, the event you'd like to see, your prior biases and prejudices, all memorialized into code, which is designed to elicit a certain response, hopefully for you to click. Does it inform you? Does it challenge you? Does it enrage you? Well, somewhere in that range. And so that's the world that we are competing with. And so one of the things that's advantageous here for community radio is we're coming at a time of unprecedented consolidation in terms of the newsroom. So by way of introduction, I started working as a reporter for the Ramsey Mara Reporter in the late 1970s. I was paid 10 cents an inch of copy and $5 if I took a photograph. At that time, I would go to a local town hall in Northwest Bergen County, and I would find 3 other sentient adults who were a good deal older than myself, who were making a living supporting their family reporting on the news. And that meant that they were obligated to go to the local police station and make inquiry, to ask to see the police blotter. And so they were a physical presence in the community. And when we say reporters beat, that's not something musical. That's about the idea that, like a police officer, you're holding your community accountable by being physically present in it on almost a ritualistic basis. And unfortunately, that entire architecture in my lifetime has so degraded that it's fair to say that it's very uncommon for a police officer to see a local reporter. And so what's in its place? Well, citizen journalists, individuals with cell phones, people with a whole range of different attitudes and motivations, capturing snippets out of context with no authentication that are thrown up on the internet and then produced at random to elicit all kinds of responses based on the propaganda agenda. So that's the state of affairs now. And so what we've seen is local community newspapers bought up in large number by like outfits like Gannett. What they do is they go and they will harvest the real estate. And by harvest, I mean they'll take the old grand newspaper, sell it off, and then sell that real estate, and then have the reporters just cover some greater territory. And it increases dramatically to the point that it's like 3 or 4 counties. And they often don't even get out of the newsroom. And if they have a newsroom. And so community radio is this beacon, this opportunity to begin a grassroots revival of authenticating information. One of the things that we saw that happened coming out of the pandemic was an inability to have consensus about what was the collective risk to people. And so people came to understand the pandemic very much based on the information they were getting from here about what their risk was based on their biases and their prejudices, and then local political information that was balkanized. So we didn't have a response like we did with polio, where there was a consensus about the risk we faced, so we inoculated as a population. That did not happen here. It's no accident that this degraded news environment, where there's not authenticated information in the form of a local radio station or a TV station that has a chance to go out and gather information, and our inability to agree on who won the last presidential election. Because again, it's all been siloed based on this analytic process that is not about informing, challenging, or engaging in a meaningful way. It's about marketing and getting you to have a consumer response. One of the things that going forward is I see an opportunity in Pacifica's coverage and when I listen to Sprouts, there are so many different stories that are popping up that are missed entirely. It's a chance actually to reintroduce this concept of authenticating information, because one of the things many people may not know is that nonprofit radio stations that are licensed like we are can't endorse candidates. I mean, and this is kind of, people say, I can't believe that that's the case, because they look at what's happening on cable and they see the deregulated market that exists in media, and they're kind of like, well, how can that be? Well, our charter as nonprofits is to actually, we can have a range of opinions and we try to facilitate different opinions. But as the convener of the conversation, we do have to maintain journalistic objectivity. And we may, to some degree, be one of the last bastions of that concept. But I think now, as we're coming through this period, Americans are looking for authenticated information. And they're looking for people who take the time to go out into the community, because that's where the news is, and not to just sit and aggregate content, which was what has been happening to a large degree. So I don't know if you want to talk about, I'll open up for questions. I do have to, we could talk about whatever you want to talk about. I can hang around for about 20 more minutes to take questions. So I do have to get back to the pledge drive.
Bob, we have about 4 minutes left for your presentation.
Great.
You just came out of doing a remote broadcast at the Republican convention together with Chali. Are there any kind of footnotes or kind of bullet points you can share with us about what you learned about putting together a team at a remote location to cover a news story?
So what I learned is that you have to have, I'm a big adherent now, which I wasn't, and I'll thank Chali Pittman for this, of Google Docs. I'm from an old school person where I'm very much like, I stay in my lane, I talk to and act collegial and work collegially with my colleagues and share tape and all the resources we have. But the concept of working like that on a common document was transformative for me. And that's right, an old bear learned new tricks. And so it was disconcerting at first to see, like, you're writing something, and then right as you're writing it, it's changing before your eyes. There's a good deal of faith in the process that we all land the plane together. I would say that part of actualizing and finding agency is taking the time before the event, and because chance favors a prepared mind. The more that you're able to work through various scenarios with stakeholders before the event, the better chance that when something gets thrown your way, if it's totally off script, you'll have at least bonded in some way, that you have some kind of framework, understanding what that person's values are. What are other things that they've done, like seemingly background about your partners, just seemingly unrelated things, when there's dead air, can save you, because you have a deep enough relationship to throw them a lifeline, or hopefully have them throw you a lifeline that keeps the show going forward by engaging listeners, even though sometimes there could be a technical mishap, and always have a segment ready to go for when your best plans completely blow apart.
Yeah. You brought in, and you're preparing now for the DNC to bring in novice reporters into a national broadcast. What did you learn about integrating new people to reporting and people more experienced, and to bring that together into a team?
So again, I think it has to do with, Chali Pittman gets all credit here. In fact, I've gone through, we're very dynamic and nimble. So I was been a co-anchor with Chali. Now she's editorial director of the project, because she distinguished herself in the actual setting with doing exactly what you described. Part of it has to do with, again, having those conversations and having people handle the equipment before. Which Chali just went over to Chicago on her own initiative and dealt with all the people that now want to participate. And I will say, we've had an exponential increase. I don't know if Sprouts is part of it. You've done so much kind stuff promoting it, but we have a lot of people that want to be engaged in this now. It's gone exponentially from where it was the RNC. Could it be also part of, lest we think we're the center of the universe, could it be the Democrats flipping their script and getting rid of the older gentleman and bringing in a new dynamic candidate at the top? Maybe. I'm just saying that it does have to do with having this sense of teamwork and also managing expectations. One of the things that happens is, because I've been in a large news organization like WNYC and in television organizations like PIX, which is a pretty big local TV station, you want your reporters to understand going in, what's the likelihood, what's the probability that they'll get on the air? Because that's another thing, is that they have this expectation. And so you have to then, once you see that there is a probability they're not going to get on the air, how can you repurpose that effort so they feel engaged and have agency? And the other thing too is, how do you
And what are other ways?
So one of the things you could do, we didn't get to do it with this, but I've done it before in other situations, is have a web component. Make sure that when you have reporting that couldn't quite get on air for some reason, logistical, it wasn't cut right, this flow of it is not right, make sure that you capture the effort in some way meaningfully, and then have it reflected on the web page. And that way it also becomes instructional, because you'll have a little bit of time. The breaking news is over, the event is over. Then you go back in and salvage that which was worthwhile in it, which then reaffirms the fact that that person participated, and also acts as a way of correcting or helping them build on their skills. I mean, that's the other thing. This is a Tai Chi. You want to be able to give people a sense that it matters what they're doing and that they're moving forward, and at the same time criticizing them, but not disabling them. And that's the delicate balance in real time.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that's the voice of experience for sure. Yeah. Does anybody else have any other questions? Or Bob, I interrupted you. Was there something else you wanted to say before you finished?
Well, I know. I just wanted to say about funding, because it's right now clear and present. You know, we're in the middle of this very WBAI is under a federal consent decree because we exist in the real world, and we've had to reinvent the way we fund ourselves in real time. And so we had a certain way of doing it, which was promising people merchandise. And as it turned out, that was
for us.
Pardon me?
Go ahead. I think that was not for us.
Oh, okay. I'm just saying. So this is when you're talking about funding in the newsroom. Literally, it's like you're driving a ship, and you've been told mid-voyage you have to change the way that you fuel the engine. And so we had a population that for decades was used to waiting for, we're going to give you the best thing ever. This is going to make you live longer, and please send money now. Now we found out that's illegal. You can't do that. So now we have to dial back to basics and say the programming is the premium. The ability to have a platform where you hear a range of ideas and news that's in depth, and we've had to do that in real time. So we've turned to the American labor movement. And so within that, there's a challenge, right? So we've amassed like low six figures from some of America's largest unions and small locals, representing close to 2 million workers. But at the same time, you have to keep an eye on the fact that the American labor movement is a human enterprise, and that there's a whole range of potential corruption aspects here. So you have to be willing to continue to report on the entities and the outlets that are providing you the resources, and then have enough integrity to create an understanding with those sources that you're going to report on them. The fact that they support the concept of authenticated local community broadcasting doesn't buy them a pass from our scrutiny.
Yeah. Okay, does anybody else have a question for Bob before we? Okay, Bob, would you like to introduce Chali?
Oh, yes. So Chali Pittman is a wonder worker, is the new public affairs. They have a phrase that they use that's different than me. The first time I met her, she was the news director par excellence. I think that they have a local parlance that's different. And WRT in Madison is just amazing. And they are deeply embedded in the community, have a deep sense of the history of Wisconsin politics, and then also a great global and national literacy about how that fits into the narrative. And so we were just so fortunate that destiny threw us together. I can't speak more highly except that of her, except that the thing after the convention I did is give her a bigger job.
Okay, Chali? You there?
Fingers crossed. Thank you, Bob. That's very kind of you. And it's wonderful to work with Bob, who has so many stories and so much experience and a unique perspective on things that I think we're all driving at. Hi, my name is Chali Pittman. I'm the News Talk and Public Affairs Director at WORT. And you're right, we do have that distinction. It means something internally, but we don't have to bother ourselves with that. I have a bit of we're planning for the DNC, so my mind's a little bit elsewhere, but I have a bit of a presentation PowerPoint from. Do you mind if I share my screen? Awesome. Okay. All right. Oh no, is it not going to let me? Okay.
Yeah, you should be able to, you have permission to do it.
You know what? I'm gonna have to quit and reopen because I don't usually use Zoom. 1 second. Apologies. Bob, tell us more about what we're doing at the DNC.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and so I will say the exciting part of this, and I wrote it up as a case study for Salon, when we went to River West, and they were great hosts, and WORT, the whole concept behind this idea of doing something in a local community radio station that is outside the armed encampment of the convention really came to me as a consequence of beat reporting in Trenton, New Jersey, where I had worked for many years. And what I saw was that there was the downtown Capitol with the Golden Dome that everything happened inside of. And then over the years, if you stepped right outside, there was an empty vacant hotel of 130 rooms. There were 3,500 vacant zombie homes and people shooting up on the street, literally a block away from where the Capitol was. And so what would happen is the elected officials would drive in their luxury cars off the interstate into the basement of the Gold Dome building, do their business, and then drive out. And so I thought, if this is the juxtaposition we have now, where there's so much misery and so much neglect right outside a state capital of a progressive blue state, what's a phenomenon right outside a convention, a national convention, where millions of dollars are poured in to make it secure? And so that's what I think we succeeded in Milwaukee, thanks to Chali's help and River West's help and the team, by making sure that we were embedded in both places. If you wanted to hear about Hulk Hogan tearing off his shirt, we had that. But if you wanted to understand intimately what happened when Mr. Sharp, a homeless veteran, was shot outside the area by 5 out-of-town Columbus police officers, we had that narrative too.
Okay. Thank you. Chali, you're back?
I am. I'm so sorry for that. And I'm sharing the wrong screen. I'm awful at using Zoom. Okay, but
Great.
welcome. And I will share, Bob, that at the DNC or at the RNC, we made a priority out of all right, can you guys see that? I'm sorry.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, you can. Oh, good.
Yeah.
Finally got it all figured out. I will mention that the Hulk Hogan thing, I had the unique mediated experience of talking about childcare access while Hulk Hogan was ripping his shirt off, and that was maybe poor planning on my part. But we did follow up on that with a journalist who has written about kayfabe, which is pro wrestling, right? Who wrote a whole book about politics and the history of pro wrestling, and got her origins at WBAI. And so we had a fabulous hour-long conversation about this. And I learned so much. So I'm excited to air that very soon. So there's always follow-up reporting to do, even after the event itself, more ideas and analysis. So hi, I'm Chali Pittman. Sorry for my disarray and my many tabs. I'm the News Talk and Public Affairs Director at WORT. I only know I have it like 7 minutes. So let's get to it. We are a community radio station in Madison, Wisconsin, the state capital. And we have we have a newsroom. We actually have a variety of programs that I'll talk about, but I wanted to get right to the heart of the question because I know newsrooms look different for different radio stations, but I really think if you're thinking about it, it's important to do, and there are ways to start small. But it's an investment. Without a budget, I understand it is somewhat of an investment, and it's mostly an investment of your time. Newsrooms are dependent on many reporters and training, and having reporters execute those stories takes a lot of time and of your time. So it is not something to be done lightly. There are consequences for trying to do too much without the resources available, because time and money to pay people for their time. There are legal consequences. You know, if you are a SLAP state where you don't have anti-SLAP protections, right, you can face lawsuits. You can face lawsuits anyway for things like defamation or errors that go unchecked. These things happen, but it's important to know that you do want to have some resources in terms of, I would say the most important thing is a producer to manage whatever news you are doing. The way we structure it at WORT, I'm the News Talk and Public Affairs Director. We have a variety of programs on WORT that are talk, and we also have news broadcasts that are fact-checked, verified. I'll talk about how I see the differences of those in a second. But more to the reasons of why you should establish a newsroom and take the opportunity to establish those resources so that you can do this anyway, is that it's an opportunity to address news deserts in your community. I am hesitant to share my screen again, but I have up on other tabs examples of our award-winning stories that we've won awards for in statewide national professional journalism competitions. One of them in the other tab includes reporting on a unhoused encampment in the city of Madison, which was temporarily allowed during the pandemic. The city did not approach wanting to move that encampment in the best way to eventually shut down that encampment. And we heard discourse from the city about it, but I hadn't heard the voices of people who were actually living there yet. And so we sent multiple reporters down there to the encampment to talk with folks. And what were they listening to? They were listening to WORT. And so I think that is a good example of, you don't know exactly who your news is reaching, but you know that it's reaching maybe the folks who are least served. And your goal is to uplift the voices of the people who are least served. I have other examples in the tab about our police accountability reporting. Madison and Dane County police, obviously we went through 2020 and Black Lives Matter protests, but there are more nuanced things that happen on a policing level, that there's not enough resources in the community, in our news desert, to look into, right? Oh, the police want a new toy. They want funding for a new toy. Let's look into that contract. Let's get the open record of that contract and hold them accountable for how they're spending that money. So, you know, we have some local media in Madison. We're a mid-sized city. We have kind of an alt weekly, and we have papers of record who I think have an interest in, you know, they're my colleagues, so I have to be careful. You know, they provide the news as it happens, right? But maybe we take a slightly different perspective in the sourcing of our story, who we talk with for that story, what stories we choose to elevate, and what we deem as important. So, you know, and it also, no one owns a story, right? So multiple outlets can do the same story. Those stories are going to look different depending on who's doing them, and the contacts and the sourcing and the comparisons that they make. I have one example, right? After 2020, we went back and open records requested all of the instances, all of the police accounts of tear gas and chemical weapons used against protesters, but from the perspective of police officers. We ended up doing a story about how much chemical weapons were used against protesters in a span of 3 days. And we had a headline of something like, in 3 days, Madison police used more tear gas than combined in like the last 18 years. And in the paper of records headline, it was the exact inverse of, if you do the math, Madison police used, an average, right? And so they were able to kind of escape how much was used. In any case, we had very different conclusions, right? But we were able to source, the paper of record, and officials and those in power would said, it's not that bad. We were on the ground. We saw what happened. And we were able to use the testimony of police officers in their own police reports saying, I couldn't feel my eyes and I was having a panic attack and I had to go to the hospital, and all of these kind of accounts, right? And so even for the folks who are on the ground in terms of policing, also wasn't a good situation for them. And so that's the kind of nuance that you can get into when you have a newsroom. Issues are rarely black and white. Like in our national discourse, even our local discourse, we try to say that's good and that's bad. What I try to tell reporters is these things are complicated, right? Systems are complicated. And so that's also the joy of local reporting, is that it's rarely bad actor expose them, but there's also like, what were the alternatives for police to use? Were protesters putting businesses and people in apartments living above them perhaps in jeopardy, right? So whenever you're faced with an ethical challenge, I like to say, show up and report what happened. But reporting what happened means very different things. It doesn't mean rewrite a press release. So not that you would, but yeah, so that's what I mean when it's an opportunity to address news deserts, is it's an opportunity to bring well-sourced reporting to the airwaves. And some things are going to be a daily turnaround. Some things might be a longer haul. I hear frequently that the news is sad and bad and makes people depressed. And I completely understand. But also, it can be really empowering for the community too. And again, this is, I think, fueled partly by TV news, and where people kind of see crime and mugshots and things that perpetuate maybe not great things in how we present information to news consumers. It's also short, and I understand why it stresses folks out. But news can look like a lot of different things, and it can look like showing up to a youth, as people reopen from the pandemic, showing up to like youth football training that is a community gathering place for the community on Madison South Side, and what it looks like for these kids to learn how to play football again together, right? That's an uplifting story. It's not fluffy. It's speaking to really real issues. The kids we talked about the real issues they had faced in the pandemic, their difficulty kind of adjusting. But it's not just sad, it's empowering. Where Madison is where our flagship university is for state schools. There are many protests, right? Of course, folks want to hear what's happening at the protests. Why was traffic jammed today? Like, you're serving many different people, but we protests. And then our bread and butter at WORT is kind of local council meetings, county meetings, some state politics, right? The Capitol is just down the street, a couple blocks away. So it's not hard for us to show up and kind of try to corner a legislator. So those are all different perspectives, but a key to community reporting is that you are an outlet that is known for being presenting information from on the ground. And in that sense, as you continue to do that, I think trust in your institution will rise, right? Because people know that if they give you a tip, you might show up. And the best sense is when you're able to present a story where everyone is slightly mad at when you have, conflicting accounts, everyone is slightly mad, but they're like, it's fine, right? We had that recently. We had elections. We had a primary on Tuesday. So on top of PNC, on top of my regular job, it's also been elections. And so we did a candidate guide. We were able to put that together where we spoke with every candidate running in state in our listening area for state office, which is important because we recently changed our voting maps. We were once the most gerrymandered state in the nation, and that's changed. And this is the first election to see that happen. or at least the primary is queuing us up for November. We had a local county executive race. That's actually a big deal in local politics. We had 2 statewide constitutional amendments on the ballot that are part of broader state government and the flow of power between the executive and the legislature, and the deep partisan divide in state government that dates all the way back to 2011 and Act 10 and an attempt by a Republican governor to take away collective bargaining rights. So in any case, right, we had an election on Tuesday, but we were able to also talk about, because we had interviewed all the candidates, we were able to cover a 5-way race, right, in a primary where all 4 came out against the 5th for his connection to TANF-related funds in, I think, Kansas. And that was unusual. It happened 4 days before the election, and we were able to dig into it. We were able to respond. We had already interviewed all the candidates. We had built trust with them. We had their phone numbers handy. And we were able to kind of give a story where no one was thrilled, right? Like, obviously, he was offended. There are these 4 who are calling on this guy for dubious dealings. We were able to do a story where we presented the information that we were able to find, and it's hard to find fault with that. WORT is a training ground for future journalists and thoughtful civilians too. I really try to take an approach that this is a news training school, right? We are doing the work that maybe is supplemented by your academic work at UW-Madison or somewhere else, but this is where you put those skills to the test, and you actually learn that there are things aren't black and white, and you are presented with difficult situations sometimes. If someone is keeping track of time, Bob knows, I tend to talk. So
We're a little bit over 10 minutes, Chali.
right now? Okay. Give me like 1 minute to sum up.
Sure.
But these are good reasons for what a newsroom can do. And I think that's an important point. There's a lot of logistical planning that goes into starting a newsroom, and I'm happy to share resources after this, but 10 minutes just isn't enough to kind of talk about that. But it also informs our community and it informs us at WORT. So one thing I'll say is we have one news program. We do an hour-long broadcast Monday through Thursday that's centered on local news. We also have other news shows that are more kind of advocacy-based or specialized. So labor news, news for working people, Spanish language news. We're redeveloping our Hmong radio news program. But those are different than talk programming, news-driven talk programming. We have morning and midday talk programming. Those are driven by news and things in the news, but frequently they start as stories on our news show where we are able to react to something happening that day and do a story on it. And then we have built up a contact list in order to transfer that over to producing for our talk programming. But they're different. They're different. And I always use, maybe I'll end here, I always use the example of a newspaper. So this is our local alt weekly. And you'll see that there are different sections. The news section of your broadcast, if you're establishing a newsroom, crucial to that is trust and accountability in who you are. And so you need to fact check information and do a whole host of things. So news is fact checked, verified, and deliberated on. We have reporters, volunteer reporters who spend 8 hours a day doing one story, 3-minute story, right? That's a lot. That's different than the other sections of that newspaper: opinion, cover story, arts, essay. Those are all valid, and those all translate into places on WORT's schedule, but they don't quite look like a newsroom where you're gathering information and driving that conversation. So we do try to set up that wall of like, talk hosts give opinions.
Okay. Kathleen, you're here, right?
I'm here. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Kathleen. Hi. Okay, Kathleen is, I actually don't know your title at WSLR.
Right. So I'm the communications director, and I have with me our news director, Johannes, but I'm doing the presentation today because he's on deadline. So, but he'll be able to jump in and answer questions that you might have. My role is, and I'll get into this with the presentation, but we're a two-pronged organization, and I'm communications director for the whole organization, but I have a journalism background, and so I am brought in on the news side to help mentor interns and also work on the print publication that we have. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so this is our logo for WSLR News. We are broadcast on Wednesdays and Fridays at 6 p.m. and Saturdays at noon. And our tagline is grassroots reporting from Southwest Florida. And that's right, I am in Sarasota, Florida, home of one of the co-founders of Moms for Liberty, Bridget Ziegler, who's on our school board. We are the home of New College of Florida, which Governor DeSantis and his cohort installed a conservative board that has changed the entire culture of beloved honors college. And they just actually threw out an entire library of books to the curb yesterday. So that was an exciting thing for us to cover. So yes, we're kind of the center of culture wars. What's his name there? Michael Flynn lives here. You know, all these interesting, lots of fodder for stories. So that's where we're coming from. I just posted our mission statement there. Again, we are WSLR, which is a radio station, low power radio station that broadcasts signal out of Sarasota, Florida, which is on the Gulf side of the state, as well as just north of us in Bradenton at another signal. And then we have our sister Fogartyville Community Media and Arts Center, which is on the same property. And Fogartyville is a performance space primarily. We have national and international touring acts that come through, but it's also a place where we have film screenings, forums, art exhibitions, and the two definitely complement each other and give us opportunities for cross promotion. I'd like to say that, again, our mission of your grassroots reporting from Southwest Florida reflects our mission statement for the greater organization. And at each broadcast, we promise our listeners that in the next half hour, we'll bring you local politics and grassroots activism all happening in your backyard. And that is the perspective, the focus that we are bringing to our news coverage, focusing on stories that impact the working people of our listening area. Yes, another interesting aspect of our coverage area, the only countywide elected Democrat is our tax collector. And so many of our local races are actually decided next Tuesday during the primary. Often it's the Republican, it's just Republican versus Republican really is going to decide who wins. So our primaries are just as important for us to cover as our November elections. We also get some of our content from our sister station WMNF in Tampa. We have a nice exchange with them with news coverage. So in addition to our 6 p.m. broadcast on Wednesday and Friday, we also do 3-minute news headlines 4 times a day by volunteers, overseen by Johannes, our news director. And then similarly to the Madison station, we have public affairs programs that amplify and complement our coverage, including political-based public affairs shows and environmental shows. And then we're just about to launch a new public affairs show, I believe, next week. And that's going to be one-on-one interviews with candidates at the state and local level. We also have a newspaper, which is what I edit. It's called The Critical Times. It comes out 4 times a year. Most of our reporters and writers for that are volunteers from the community. I myself will take a couple stories and then recruit some others, but it's mostly a volunteer-based publication. And then, as I mentioned, this picture that you see here is of our Fogartyville side of things. We have, community forums. In fact, we just had a candidates forum for city commission here this week, and we hosted that at Fogartyville, which generated news for our news coverage. Let's see, yeah, okay. So just if you want to be interested in how we break down, we're pretty scrappy. We have a full-time news director just as of 2023. And Johannes leads our weekly news meetings on Mondays. He makes editorial decisions and edits reporter scripts, as well as getting the broadcast all produced. We also have one part-time community news reporter. That's also new for us as of December of last year. That person rose up from the ranks of intern. So Florence was one of our interns, and now she is our first part-time paid community news reporter. We also have a very strong college internship program, which is funded through grants. So our interns get usually both college credit and an hourly wage. And a lot of them have been coming out of New College in the past. That's kind of changing with the changes happening at New College. And then we're really powered, though, by volunteer citizen journalists like this Ramon Lopez, who you see here. He is a veteran journalist, retired. And we, discover folks like Ramon through our different outreach at events. We're constantly trying to get more volunteer citizen journalists. And then there's me, who I mentioned. I just became full-time August 1st. I was part-time for 2 years before that. And so I'll be moving into probably more of a role with the news department now that I'm here full-time. So we're scrappy now, but we were even scrappier before. Like I said, it's been really just these last year or so that we've had salaried people on our team. Before that, it was definitely even led by volunteers and powered almost entirely by interns. This is how we train folks. You can see in this picture, that's me with one of our interns. We're at a protest before a school board meeting in Sarasota County. A member of our staff instructs all our contributors on the basics of Audacity, which of course is the free software, the open source software for recording and editing. We have both a news meeting on Mondays to go over the week's stories from the week before. And then in addition to that, our interns get 1 hour a week of an education on a particular topic. I sometimes lead those. We start folks with daily headlines. Again, those are 4 times a day. Move them to more basic stories. They always want to go for those huge enterprise stories, and we have to dial them back and just make sure that they're comfortable with the, covering maybe one meeting and what was the lead story that came out of that meeting. And then you can get into more of the enterprise pieces once you're comfortable doing that. The way we work, reporters submit scripts in advance to Johannes, who gives them feedback. And again, we're like in Madison, we are definitely a training ground, and that's how we see ourselves. Oh, yes, in this past spring, we were able to get a grant from the Florida Humanities to have both a series of public newsroom forums where we invited other, like our daily newspaper and other radio stations and other, I think our traditionally, historically Black newspaper was there to just hear from the community about what they think the holes are in our local journalism coverage, and to sort of find some commonality and find some ways to collaborate and to sort of break down silos, and those, and out of those community forums came folks who were interested in participating in citizen journalism workshops, which we held 4 times in the spring. And we used that opportunity to sort of go a little deeper with potential volunteers and recruit them to be part of our news team. Yep. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, great. So Althea, tell us about the KBOO Newsroom.
Yes, I will do my best to move quickly for us all here. I have a little presentation as well. This is a slideshow that I developed in the pandemic to give people an idea of how the KBOO News works. This isn't our actual newsroom. We do have nice light like this, but this is what I was like telling people to envision. All of our prospective volunteers are like, imagine us being together. So I'll talk a little bit about how our newscast works, how I train people, and kind of our format. I always start out training new people by talking about our mission statement. So we're located in Portland, Oregon, but we're really serving a community of Oregon and Southwest Washington with our translators. So our values include equity, ethical reporting, rich community conversation, trying to focus on essential knowledge for the local community and stories that you won't hear anywhere else. We're committed to uplifting the voices of oppressed and underserved communities, and we strive to hold those with power accountable wherever they exist. So how do we do that? We have a daily news hour from 5 to 6 weekdays, and that airs right after we broadcast Democracy Now! So part of how we think about our newscast is, if you're going to Democracy Now! To get your hour's worth of, national news, we want to try to follow that up with an hour's worth of local news. If you're not going to pay attention to anything else all day, that's what we want to try to deliver. So from 5 to 5:30, that is our main broadcast. So that's going to be our headline news that consists of readers that are read by our volunteer anchors, that are written by our volunteer reporters, audio clips that are being produced by our volunteers, and then also audio clips that we syndicate, some of which are from Pacifica. From 5:30 to 6, that is our news in-depth segment. So that's, 15 to 30-minute interviews and stories that are submitted by our volunteers. We are very, very much like a learning, training newsroom. People come to us with no experience at all. And so, working on building up all of those skills is something that's super important. During the pandemic, all of our news was pre-recorded. So we worked our way out of that somewhat. 3 days a week we're live. It just requires more people. I'm the only person who is full-time employed. Everybody else who works on the newscast is a volunteer. So we've definitely moved some things around over the years to try to, maximize how much we can do with however much support, which does vary because we're talking about volunteers. Also, I should mention, if you have any questions as I go, please feel free to stop me. Our daily production schedule is pretty much set from like 10 to 4, and in terms of like how people can engage with that. But we definitely do maintain opportunities outside of that schedule. A lot of our, like I said, people come in with no experience, come in with like a particular thing that they like to talk about. I try to get everybody at least a baseline in the main skills that we need to build the newscast, so that we can have that kind of give and take. I think that's something important to emphasize with volunteers, because as much as, they're doing us such a huge service, to be, supporting a newscast and to be able to actually publish something every day, like that's pretty major. It's also, not just a project that they get to do whatever they want. And I think that that's something that other presenters kind of mentioned too, is like having standards and making sure that it's something that gets put together collectively. So this is a little bit of our daily production schedule. As Lisa kind of mentioned earlier, working remotely was a big shift for us. We used to only write things on the whiteboard. There was nothing virtual. Like inventing Google Docs is kind of what we were dealing with. But I can show you maybe if this wants to work for me. I was looking at WORT. We have our daily pitch spreadsheet where folks will sign up for stories. Oftentimes this is sort of like synthesizing news headlines, things that need to happen in the headlines of the news. And then we also have another tracking thing that I do here to determine what is going on in the second half of our program. On Fridays, we air Counterspin, shout out Counterspin. But you know, we're talking about community events where we have a regular segment where we interview reporters from different or from Street Roots, which is our like local street paper, about what they've been working on, and that's been really good. And we have some national, like David Ruedenberg is not local, he's down in California, but he will contribute stories to us as well that that help our newscast as well. What else can I say? There's a few different roles that we kind of conceptualize here, and I think I might pivot over to talking about our training, which this is a new thing that I made up recently. But thinking about a skill tree, this is sort of like a way to describe the different roles and how people can work into those roles. One thing that we really focus on is like, or one thing that I should say I'm focusing on is I don't want it to be so obtuse about how you develop yourself as a radio producer and as a journalist within our news department. So I've created this thing, and I won't go through all of it, but to try to be more transparent to people about how they build those skills. And there are certain things, like I said, that are like core competencies, I guess. I feel like that sounds so corporate, but I've been thinking about it today. But being able to write for the radio, being able to do some basic audio editing, being able to voice, and then also, of course, know the FCC rules. So those are some of the basic things that I want everyone to do, even though some people have a very like specific thing that they want to talk about. I want to be your transit person. Anytime there's a new bus, I want to be the one to talk about it. For me, that's great. I will do my best to sort of like set people up for that kind of a thing, but it may be the case that we need some extra help to get the newscast out the door. So there's a lot of different opportunities in all of that. Looking at the questions that we were discussing, some of the like the philosophy of training is I actually inherited from Lisa, shout out Lisa. But getting people on air as soon as possible is definitely part of our philosophy. I will say there's like a little balance to that. I think it used to kind of be, hey, welcome to your first day. You're reading a story and now you're on air. And for some people, they love that. It's exhilarating. It gets them in, and that makes them want to contribute and want to keep coming back. For other people, they're like, oh boy, I don't feel ready for that. So it's that little bit of balance, right? Of, hey, we're going to help you. We're going to support you in creating something that is really professional for your newscast, for the newscast, but, you know, not throwing people into something that they don't feel prepared for. I think another part of our philosophy is adding a little bit of fun as well. We have an ongoing segment. We have a few ongoing segments, actually, but we have a volunteer who does a news poem every week. So, you know, I think part of what community radio and community news can offer is that sort of humanizing aspect, right? And part of the reason that we've seen trust erode from traditional news sources is that people feel alienated from them. Like there was a whole conspiracy that went around of like, why are they all saying the same story, not understanding what a wire service is. So those are some of the things I think about. Are there any questions about all of this? I'm trying to go quickly, hopefully not talking too terribly fast. Yeah. Or we can pivot over to Dawn, who has something quite helpful to say, I think.
I would love to hear from Dawn, because Dawn's piece is so unique. It's really thoughtful and super impactful. Dawn, we saved the very, very best for last. Thank you for being with us today. Can you talk about your book, Pledge? Or no, talk about what you already had prepared to talk about. Don't, yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll go quickly. Lisa sent me a bunch of questions, and I will go through them for time. First question was, what does the role of the news department play in fundraising for the station? I think that the role of the news department is to work with the fundraising department, of course, membership department. And the way the news department can do that in part is through what a lot of stations are doing, through community engagement type programs where they solicit news tips from the community and In exchange for that, the people who contribute news tips, and it expands the ability of the news department to get stories that they may not get from other sources. But the other thing that it does is the people who contribute those news tips, whether it's through webmail or whatever, those emails then get migrated to the membership department, and the folks in the membership department can then reach out to those folks, and ask them if they're interested in contributing to the success and welfare of the station. About 56% of people who do want to contribute through news tips and things like that end up being donors for the station. So that's one way that news and fundraising can work together. People who have an investment in the product of the news are interested in supporting the station. So, quickly, that's one way that news departments and fundraising departments, engagement and fundraising can work together. The overview of the book. Basically, the book is Pledge the Public Radio Fund Drive. I published it in 2019. It took me about 4 years to write it. And it's a doorstop. But the whole point of it, it's really broken down into two parts. The first part looks at the infrastructure of public radio. It looks at the infrastructure of all type of NCE type broadcasting. I look at the basics. I talk about the major players, whether it's NPR, APR, PRI, PRX, and then community radio and LPFMs. I talk about some of the main problems in public radio, which really center around three things: revenue, spending, and the audience. Everything seems to be revolving around those three and some kind of interaction between those three. Then I talk about things like time, like how clocks are organized, so stations can make sure that, when they're dealing with a network, they have plenty of time to talk about their own local issues as well, because people connect to their local stations more than they connect to the network, although stations have a problem with that because sometimes network programming is very good and people like the quality of network programming. And so then when local stations produce local programming, there's kind of a shift in how the programming is perceived by the audience. So people say they want local programming, but they really are interested in the network programming. And so stations have to walk that line sometimes. Also, I talk about how stations need to make sure that when they're engaging with the audience, that the audience feels like they're actually engaging with their local station and not some network affiliate. I've noticed that sometimes it's very difficult to get in touch with stations. It's very difficult to actually reach a person at a station because between webmail and social media, stations are very accessible, but you can't really contact them. And then being accessible and being able to be reached are two different things. And then the second part of the book is really broken down into drives and elements, like what constitutes a fund drive. I tried to really autopsy a fund drive. You talk about the drives and elements, breaks and pitches, goals, the language that's used, listener comments, how stations tailor their pledge drives to their audience. Like a pledge drive in Montana might sound much different than a pledge drive in Florida. And then cheerleading, how stations promote the idea that, our station is the best station, which is good until you start thinking about how it's important that public radio and community radio as a genre really needs to support each other, not be in the silos of our station is the best. Because when someone moves from one public radio station to another, they tend to compare stations and they'll say, oh, this station never did that. Our station is the best. And then there's almost this, not exactly competition, but it doesn't really make the whole cohesiveness of public radio operating as one big family or community radio as one big family. It doesn't really contribute to that. So I think one of the things that community radio could do is to not separate stations and by saying, oh, this news is better than this news, or our coverage is better than this coverage. That happens a lot in commercial and public radio also. I think it's more important that stations, do emphasize the fact that it is a family. And then the last thing I talk about is gifts, premiums, and leverage, challenges and matches, games. I talk about renewals, sustainers, upsells, major giving and bequests. And then I talk about free riding and moral hazards, interns, volunteers, and temps, and then conclusion. So basically, that's a quick overview of the book. Things that news departments can do in support of fundraising and/or member service drives. First, like what Lisa said when we started out, it's important to realize that sometimes these stations, they do have an ethical responsibility to not let the money-making side and the newsroom side get too close to each other. I mean, even in community radio, that can be a problem. Community radio stations tend to have business relationships with small local businesses. And those businesses may have a particular political alignment, which is why they are supporting community radio stations in the first place. But, even though they're local businesses, they still may have an outsized influence on the programming of the station, as opposed to, a donor that's maybe only giving, $30 a year or $60 a year through a sustaining membership or something like that. So even in those cases, a donor can say, for a local car dealership or some kind of a community organization, they can say, well, we really would like it if you guys would consider doing this. And I mean, if they're providing you with a big challenge grant or a big match or something, it can be really easy to be tempted to, okay, well, let's see what we can do for that, because they're providing a big chunk of money. But that's what that firewall is supposed to exist for. But at the same time, it's important that the news department and the fundraising department do collaborate, and fundraising realizes, well, the news is the product, and the product is what builds the relationship, and the relationship is what makes people want to give. So however stations are able to walk that line, and it's not an easy line, it does have to be walked, because when stations end up not making their goals for their fundraising, that bottom line doesn't move at all. And so they're going to have to come back with another drive, maybe a mini drive, maybe a weekend drive. They've got to make that money up. So making that relationship clear to listeners is important. Making it clear to donors is important. And also inside the building, it's really important. The people who are making money for the station aren't just the pitchers, aren't just the reporters. It's management. Everybody in the station has to be behind the fundraising effort. Not just the news department, not just the membership department, but the station manager, but the programming director. Everyone has to be marching in the same direction. Because when people want to have contact with their station, they want that relationship. And if they happen to meet the station manager while they're shopping at the grocery store, they want to hear the same thing from the station manager, the same passion, the same enthusiasm as they're hearing from the pitcher during pledge drive time. So that's how news departments and fundraising and membership drives can work together. And the last question Lisa gave me, why is the work of community radio newsrooms important to the larger world? Because as all of you have said, community radio is really kind of like the last bastion of truthful, community-driven, activist news. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we hear in community radio, we don't hear anywhere else. Even here in Portland, I mean, sometimes our own newspaper, the Willamette Week, sometimes they don't tell the stories the way that we would like to see them told, because they're not always, sometimes their relationships are not our relationships. And, some of the stories get treated differently. And so the reporters of community radio, the reporters of KBOO, I mean, I was a volunteer at KBOO for 5 or 6 years and worked in the news department. And I mean, I love news. My background was commercial broadcasting, newspapers, military broadcasting. So it's like, I really appreciate what community radio does, and I really support community radio. And the news that community radio offers, it gives the community a different perspective that it will not get anyplace else. So that's how community radio newsrooms impact and are important to the larger world. And I guess I'm done.
Okay, well, thank you, Don. That's
Welcome. Great.
yeah. But before you finish, tell again the name of your book and where it can be found.
The book is called, you probably can't see it because of my background. Oh yeah, you can see it. Pledge. Yeah, the background is just killing. Pledge the public radio. It's called Pledge the Public Radio Fund Drive. In fact, I was Ursula was kind enough to allow me to present at the GRC conference a few years ago, and I talked about pledge drives and community radio and newsrooms and things like that. So yeah, it's on Amazon, and it's also you can get it through Powell's. You can get it through most major bookstores. Say again.
That's just Bob, can you mute yourself? Okay, he just bled in, that's all. Thank you. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Althea. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Chali, and thank you, Bob. One of the things that, you know, I got from, I mean, I heard a lot of important things, but it just kind of drives home again how much talent we have in our network, and that, you know, the work I do is working with the best people in America. So I think it's really obvious to at least me, and maybe to Stephanie, that we would really hope that we can get each of you to come back and do a full presentation by yourselves, because there's so much. Kathleen, I'm dying to hear your tips, learned lessons that we didn't hear. There's just so much information that it's obvious that all of you can share. So hopefully we can have permission to come and bug you for another presentation by yourselves. Go ahead,
Could I
Bob.
say something before you? I just wanted to say I found this inspiring, and also to Don's point about the problem of people being able to reach the management. It's important to mention that in New York, we were coming off of the mass death event and the pandemic. We were having major issues where, like every institution in America, management and people that were responsible for supervising people stopped coming to work. And so it changed and we're in the process now of I almost cried the other day. We had 12 people in the studio and some people were eating dinner. And it's the first time that had happened in a really long time, because we are rebuilding this in a very real way of community. And so it's important, if we're going to have community, that there be that space, and the idea people were working in their own silos. So as you all were saying, the newsroom becomes the convener in a way, right? Because it brings together everybody. So it has kind of this thing of, that's where the brain is kind of being worked through things. I just want to tell one anecdote about why it's so important to go to work every day. In the middle of the pledge drive, again, we're under this SEC consent. It's new ground for us. It's hard to know. We've retired the debt, $133,000 we owed for 11 months of behind debt in the transmitter. We retired that, and we wanted to raise the $13,000 it's per month in one day. So Kazai and I sat down, 7 a.m. drive time, coffee ready to go. A call comes in, and Catherine Davis picks it up, and she tells us that they don't want to talk on the go in to be on the air, but I need to call them immediately afterwards. So as soon as I finish that show, I go and call this person, and she's standing in a Trader Joe's, this woman who is like 50 some odd years of age, standing in a Trader Joe's in Tennessee somewhere, telling me that she'd been trying to get through to the station for several months, and that she was the executor of her art teacher's estate. The woman who was the art teacher was 85 years old, was a belly dancer. Her first job when she came to New York decades ago was at BAI. And this favorite art student had been trying to reach us and told us that the lawyer said if they didn't reach us on this day, they would send the $18,800 to unclaimed funds for the state of New York. So I'm just saying, hope is on the other side of that phone call you need to answer.
Clay? Thank you, Bob. Hi, Clay.
Is this working?
Yes.
Hello? Okay. Hey, everyone. I appreciated the presentations. I'll try to keep my comments to the point. Having started and managed several community stations, coming from the practice of the Alliance for Community Media, where we were trying to find a balance being funded by the local government entities, along with balancing our free speech rights. And some of you know there were case law that went to KKK versus the city of Topeka, Kansas, and also WMMN with Dee Halleck case went to the Supreme Court and found that the community station had a right to pick and choose programs. But coming from that perspective, every station I went and started or managed tried to institute, and most of the time successful in introducing election season policies. And I'm also interested, so comparing notes with others here, how do you balance when election season comes around, you have in-station board-approved policies for balancing advocacy, journalism, folks having their individual programs, you offering, trying to offer news segments, and that might even cover controversy against also your public service needs to maybe offer each candidate balance, equal airtime, where the fairness doctrine went away and took away the provisions of equal time for all candidates. We can voluntarily offer that, but I'm just wondering how others are doing these sort of balances in regards to your own operations. Crickets?
Yeah.
I can't.
No,
I can't.
okay.
We keep a log. I know, and when we are aware that one of our public affairs shows is going to have a particular candidate on, we make sure that there is, that we ask our hosts to reach out to the opponent and offer them to come on. And so we're still kind of we're making outreach in regard to equal time, and we keep a log of it. And then we always make sure that, especially in reported news stories on the news broadcast, that we acknowledge when a candidate, did not return our calls or declined our interviews, et cetera, so that our listeners know that we did reach out.
Go ahead, Lisa.
I'm going to jump in here really quick. I actually ran the KBOO live election night coverage for more than 20 years, and we a great big spreadsheet. I'm so glad I almost cursed just then. A great big spreadsheet, every candidate on it, and that is heavy. It's not a small thing, and literally that spreadsheet tracks who contacted that person and what the result was. But we used to do live election coverage just in one night, and we could get virtually every single candidate either on tape or live in the building. People loved coming into the building for many, many years. And I also had a live band. Straight up, the live band made it. It made it unforgettable. But now here in Portland, because we have our new form of government, we're tripling the number of people running for office. And so it's a monster. So and Althea's not here, but in the KBOO newsroom, she's got a great big chart. It's got all of the candidates' names for every heckin' race on it. And she's trying to plug people into it show by show or volunteer by volunteer. But it's a big deal. And you have to do something to make it fun. We should have one of these on just how to cover election night, but I'm going to back out because we're so over time. We're like half an hour over time. Anyway, thanks.
Does anybody else have any questions? We actually didn't have a time limit on this meeting, so if somebody...
Oh, I didn't know that. I see that Chali's got her hand up.
Okay, Chali, go ahead.
Oh, I didn't realize that, but I do want to co-sign the strategies that you shared for covering elections. I've found that it is best to be proactive. So find out when your filing deadline is for candidates, and the day after that, I will go and make a spreadsheet, co-sign that, and find the contact information. You can request all of that information from your clerk's office, and then it actually has contact information, and then you start plugging them into I plug all that information into a spreadsheet first, and then I go to our producers and I say, all right, and our hosts and our reporters, and say, who wants to do what, but you have to take the whole race. So it's you have to take this whole race, and you have to take the same length of time. So we pretend that the fairness doctrine still exists. It's been a political football. It could again. We still track, keep logs of how that interview turned out, just in case that comes back, because I don't want to mess with the FCC. As for bona fide news, right, bona fide news, that that doesn't, if it's about something else, we just pretend like we didn't do it, and obviously wouldn't ask the other candidate for equal time on a very niche thing. But
I think that when it comes to actually news segments, that the fairness doctrine doesn't affect them.
right, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. Right. So, you can pretend that doesn't exist. But I think it's important to not just the legality of the fairness doctrine, but it's important to think about what we have at WORT is we have a civically engaged volunteer membership. And so sometimes people will run for office or they're involved in a campaign. And it's important to have that standard that everyone knows, that if you reach out to one candidate on your show, you have to reach out to the other candidates, because what happens is sometimes there are folks at WORT, or there's like a candidate that's very ideologically opposed with many of the hosts, or ideologically informed with many of the hosts here. And so that candidate, if left unchecked, would probably get much more airtime than the rest of the candidates in the race, because they have already found a hook into the station. And that would give the appearance that the station is endorsing a candidate, right? When we're not, we can't do that. And we want to provide the same amount of time for all the candidates in a race. We have an interest in providing fair and the widest range of candidates available to people to make their decision. But that's also why we are so proactive about it. Otherwise, we would have to be reactive in trying to book these other candidate interviews anyway, because someone wanted to have one of the candidates on. So.
Thanks, Chali. There was a question in the chat about where to find a recording of this meeting. And so Stephanie's going to put it in the chat here for you. It's on the Pacifica website. Pacifica Network website.
Yeah.
Any other responses? Yeah.
I want to say one thing, that in all the years that I did live election night coverage and election coverage, was really the most important thing was getting youths involved. So KBOO has a youth collective, and you might think, like, what does that have to do with elections? But the youth collective, they infused energy into it. They had people in there had a different take on it. And some of those people are the best and brightest people who don't even know that what they're doing is impactful. So I'm just going to strongly encourage you to include the youth if you can.
Yeah, I agree with Lisa. I had a very interesting experience when I was managing KHOI here in Ames. During an election, I don't remember which election it was. It was a presidential election. These two teenagers walked in. They were about 13, and they just walked into the building and they said they wanted to be on the air. And so I said, okay, it was a show that it was a music, it was kind of, anyway, it was a show that was no problem interrupting. So I put them on the air and I said, what do you want to say? And they had this, they wanted to talk about how negative advertising was frightening them on YouTube. And it was really, it really was a revelation to me to hear what they were saying. And that's something, I had never thought about as an adult, but these were teenagers of color, and they were hearing negative ad campaigns attacking, welfare and attacking, systems that they knew their parents depended on. And they were really, really frightened by it. And it was a whole perspective that I, hadn't even thought of. So I agree, young people, they're looking at different issues.
I saw that people are asking where they can get the slideshows. Do we want to send them all to somewhere?
Well, that's kind of, I don't know if the people on the slideshows want to do that.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
That's kind of your, we'll find out who wants to share a slideshow and post it. Are all of you on the station managers listserv? Hopefully so. And if not, write to me at Ursula@pacifica.org and say you're interested in any slideshows, and we'll send you what's possible. We haven't really vetted that with our presenters.
I mean, and I guess we're wrapping this up, but I just want to say this. I say it every time, but it's the most important thing that you need to hear. Whatever we have in the future, you guys, is something that you are going to create. You have the baton. You are the best and brightest, and just keep going. I just have to say that.
Don put a post in. You want to read that?
Mhm.
He put it in the chat.
Says, I've been doing freelance political interviews of candidates since 2014. I can provide Clay with some information if he might find it helpful. I usually end up talking to about 1/6 of the Secretary of State list. During on years, that's about 350 candidates.
Wow.
During off years, it's about 150 candidates. So reasonably substantial. I'm doing those interviews this year's also. Wow,
Okay, thank you, Don.
yeah.
Well, thank you to everybody. Unless there's any other comments or questions, we'll wrap this up. And again, this Stephanie put the link in the chat as to where you will be able to find this on the website within maybe 2 or 3 days, maybe sometime next week. And thank you, everybody, for participating in this. And thank you so much to the presenters. We really appreciate it. And we, like I said, we really hope we can hound you to come and do a presentation on your own, because it's really incredible information that we can get from you. So thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day.
Have a good day.